Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, April 26th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today: Israeli troops at U.S. Pier in Gaza come under attack. So mortar rounds were fired at Israeli forces making preparations for a U.S.-built pier in Gaza on Wednesday. And this really highlights the danger of this project that the U.S. is now working on, and the danger of it leading to serious escalation. So U.S. officials blamed the attack on Gaza-based militants and said that no American equipment was damaged. The attack came as U.S. forces started construction of the pier off the coast of Gaza. Pentagon spokesman Pat Ryder said on Thursday, quote, "I can confirm that U.S. military vessels have begun to construct the initial stages of the temporary pier and causeway at sea," end quote. Ryder said that this mortar attack targeted a marshalling area for the pier. He said, quote, "We're aware of reports that a small number of mortars landed in the vicinity of the marshalling yard area for humanitarian assistance that will eventually be the delivery site that this pier will support," end quote. So U.S. officials insist that the U.S. military personnel involved in this project will stay hundreds of meters offshore, but that still puts them in range of a rocket, of a Hamas rocket or whoever else might decide to attack these U.S. troops. A successful attack, of course, could lead to a huge escalation of U.S. involvement in this Israeli campaign in Gaza, in this slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza. If U.S. troops get hit hard, and again, there's not really many details about this mortar attack, but I thought this was important to highlight because it does really show the risk. I mean, this is a really crazy thing that Biden has ordered the U.S. military to do. And, they say the idea of this is to facilitate the delivery of more humanitarian aid into Gaza. And President Biden ordered this instead of pressuring Israel to open more land crossings for aid deliveries, which is by far the most efficient way to get more aid into Gaza is to open the borders and ship the trucks in through there. And Israel is still putting restrictions on this aid. So the way that this is going to work is that the aid is going to come from Cyprus. That's going to be like the hub. It's going to be shipped from Cyprus to this pier in Gaza, and then it's going to get on land through some sort of maritime causeway. And then Israel's going to inspect it again. So they're requiring two inspections. It's going to be Israel inspecting it in Cyprus, and then Israel again inspecting it once it reaches the shore. And if they put all these same restrictions on it, they're going to turn away a lot of stuff. And they're saying that the pier is going to be able to bring in about 90 aid trucks per day, with the potential for 150. And that's not that much when you could, if you look at what can come through the border crossings each day. Some days the Rafah border crossing, hundreds of aid trucks have gone in. So 90 trucks, adding 90 trucks when you could just open another border crossing. And the UN said that the average of aid trucks entering Gaza this month per day has been 200, and that's well short. They've been saying that they want to hit the 500 mark, which was how many were entering Gaza per day before October 7th. So that for a real humanitarian relief effort at this point, they need more than that. So they're saying the average has been 200, and this is despite these claims from Israel saying that they've been letting in much more aid. So again, this whole thing, it's just like the risk, the fact that it's not really that efficient, not really adding that much, the cost of it. I'm sure it's going to cost a lot of money. One thing I should mention, I should add this to the story, is that this was Netanyahu's idea. The pier was originally Netanyahu's idea, which, this is the guy who is trying to starve these people to death in Gaza. So, does he have some sort of ulterior motive for this whole thing? I know there was one report by an Israeli journalist. This was the only, it was only really one source on this, who said at Israeli Knesset meeting, behind closed doors, Netanyahu suggested that Palestinians could be deported through this pier. Again, that's just one source, but I'm sure I wouldn't be surprised if that's something that he's thinking. So it's important to keep that in mind, that this project is Netanyahu's idea. All right, so the next one here, Belgian agency aid worker killed in Gaza. So this article is from Politico. Abdallah Nabhan and members of his family died overnight after an Israeli airstrike in the city of Rafah in southern Gaza. And this is according to the Belgian Development Agency, which is named Anabel, I think. I might be pronouncing that wrong. But this is another example of Israel. They continue to kill aid workers. This is a Palestinian man who worked for a Belgian company. And Belgium's foreign minister said that Israel's ambassador was summoned following Nabhan's death. She said, quote, "Bombing civilian areas and populations is against international law. I summon the Israeli ambassador to condemn this unacceptable act and demand explanations," end quote. So Nabhan, whose father, brother, niece, and son were also killed in the attack, was on the list of people eligible to leave Gaza. He's Palestinian, and the aid agency believes his family were as well. We haven't heard much, since the World Central Kitchen workers were killed. Biden told Israel to do a few things, and it doesn't look like they've really done much to increase the aid shipments into Gaza. I know there's some relief for the people in North Gaza because bakeries were able to reopen because they got flour. So hopefully that is still flowing in. But in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't look like Israel has really done much at all, and everybody's kind of moved on from that story now. But here we have another aid worker, and there's something like over 200 aid workers have been killed by Israel in Gaza so far. All right, I left the one up yesterday about Netanyahu wanting to crack down on U.S. protesters. It's just such a crazy story. The next one here, Hamas official says that the group is willing to disarm for a two-state solution. So a top Hamas political official has told the Associated Press that the Palestinian group would be open to a 5-year truce with Israel and would disarm and become solely a political party if a Palestinian state was established along the pre-1967 borders. So speaking in Istanbul, Khalil al-Hayya said Hamas would accept, quote, "a fully sovereign Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza Strip and the return of Palestinian refugees in accordance with the international resolutions," end quote. He said that Hamas wants to unite with Fatah, which heads the Palestinian Authority, and Palestinian Liberation Organization to form a unified government for Gaza and the West Bank. Hamas first sent the signal last week that it might be willing to dissolve its military wing known as the Al-Qassem's Brigade in exchange for a two-state solution. After a meeting with Hamas's political chief Ismail Haniyeh, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan said that the Palestinian group was willing to accept those conditions. So that was last week. That made the headlines. That Turkey relayed that Hamas was saying this, and now we have a Hamas political official who's not in Gaza, saying this. And realistically, this isn't something Israel's going to go for, anytime soon, especially when Netanyahu's at the helm. He has made his opposition to this idea very clear. He has said that he will not allow a Palestinian state in any post-war scenario, and he has credited himself as the reason why there is not a Palestinian state, saying he prevented a two-state solution. And another major impediment to a two-state solution along the 1967 borders is the over 500,000 Israeli settlers in the West Bank, is the settlements. And settlers continue to terrorize Palestinians, drive them out of their homes, and take their land. This is still going on today, and it's really increased over the past few months. And the Netanyahu government, has explicitly stated that it supports settlement expansion with the ultimate goal of annexing the West Bank. That's what they want to do. Smotrich, the Israeli finance minister, who's also the minister in charge of the West Bank, he's a settler himself. And he has, for years has been on the record saying that Israel should annex the whole West Bank. He wants to kick all the Palestinians out. I saw him. He was saying that if the Palestinian Authority tries to get recognition from the UN, again, if they have success in that Israel should respond by annexing the West Bank. That's what he's telling Netanyahu. So Netanyahu has maintained that his goal is to eradicate Hamas, even though we've seen both U.S. and Israeli intelligence indicate that that's not possible and that they don't think Hamas is going anywhere. According to Al-Haya, this Hamas official, he said that Israeli forces have not destroyed more than 20% of Hamas's capabilities. So he's saying the only solution now is a deal for Israel. So it's tough to know really how many Hamas fighters have been killed. I know a few months ago they said something like 5,000 or 6,000 have been killed. He's saying that they haven't destroyed more than 20%. So in comments to AP, an advisor to Netanyahu dismissed Al-Haya and said Israel's goals have not changed. He said, quote, Prime Minister Netanyahu's government set a mission to destroy Hamas's military and governing capabilities in Gaza, free the hostages, and ensure that Gaza does not pose a threat to Israel and the rest of the civilized world. In the future, these goals will be achieved, end quote. And I think that is the attitude of Netanyahu is, no deal. Just keep this thing going, and they're probably going to invade Rafah soon. All right, so the next one here, Poland and Lithuania say that they can help return military-age men to Ukraine. So Poland and Lithuania have said they can help return military-aged Ukrainian men to Ukraine as Kiev is looking for more conscripts to put on the front lines where Ukrainian forces are facing a brutal fight and an advancing Russian army. So the comments came after Ukraine announced that it was suspending consular services for military-age men living abroad as a way to pressure them to return home to fight. The restrictions include prohibiting men ages 18 to 60 from applying for passports while abroad. So Poland's defense minister said this on Wednesday, basically saying, yeah, we might be able to help out. And he was actually asked, does that mean Poland would agree to transport Ukrainians back to Ukraine? Which sounds like, does that mean Poland is willing to physically deport these men to send them back to Ukraine so they are conscripted and sent to die on the front lines? And his response was, everything is possible. And then Lithuania's defense minister said that Vilnius was also willing to help send Ukrainians back to fight. And he suggested that Lithuania would not be willing to physically deport Ukrainians, but could pressure them in other ways. He said, quote, of course, no one will collect them and take them to Ukraine. This will not happen. But it is possible to limit these persons in terms of social benefits, work permits, documents. These are options that I hear from the Polish side as well. So let's wait and see what option they will offer. Maybe it will also be suitable for Lithuania, end quote. So it's estimated that there's 860,000 Ukrainian men living outside of Ukraine in Europe, and some were able to leave during the war despite martial law prohibiting men ages 18 to 60 to leave the country. But others lived outside of Ukraine before the invasion, and Ukraine wants to bring them back and send them into the meat grinder. So now this next story here, Frontline Ukrainians fear new aid from the U.S. will be a disaster. So this is an article from an unlikely source. It's a Daily Beast article. Daily Beast is not an outlet I would normally run an article from, but this one is basically interviews with Ukrainians living in Kharkiv, the city in the northeast that's been close to the front lines this whole time. And all these people that they talk to are saying that they're unhappy that new U.S. aid has passed because they think it's just going to prolong the war and that Ukraine has no chance of winning. And these seem like just ordinary people. So I'll just read a little bit from the article. After its passage last week, some members of the House waved Ukrainian flags while others cheered in celebration that Ukraine will soon receive new weapons ahead of Russia's expected counteroffensive. Signing it into law at a White House ceremony on Wednesday, Biden promised the arms shipment would begin immediately and hailed what he called a good day for world peace. The reaction here near the front lines of the war felt very different. Oleg, a Ukrainian who spoke with the Daily Beast, side when he was told about the events 5,000 miles away in Washington, D.C. He said, quote, "Are you serious? Now this war will just continue," end quote. So he says that the area that he lives in Kharkiv city has been repeatedly attacked by Russian missiles, and he says he's not pro-Russia, that he doesn't want to live under Russian occupation, but that he thinks this money is just going to continue the war, and the big problem is that there's too much corruption in Ukraine. He said, quote, "The new money will just prolong the war, and civilians and the military are tired. People want peace and negotiations, not the condition of the conflict," end quote. And then there's a few other people here. Local cafe restaurant worker, she said that, "Will we win the war if we're given these weapons? Probably not." And then Vladimir, a construction worker, said basically that the money is benefiting the wrong people. He said, quote, "Only for politicians, their pockets, they buy houses, apartments, and we have friends who are at war," end quote. And he goes on he talks a lot about the corruption, saying that there's stolen money. Oh, here we go. He said, quote, "We might have won this war if we hadn't stolen money, but since we don't have money, of course we're losing. It doesn't mean that Ukraine will win the war. It will go to the government. There will be more destruction. More people will die. We have to sit down and negotiate before the whole infrastructure of Ukraine is smashed," end quote. And remember what Biden said also when he signed the bill into law was that, there's reports that they were cheering in the trenches in eastern Ukraine. And then another woman named Anya, who says that she actually supports Russia and wants the war to end. And she actually, her son was a Ukrainian soldier who died in combat last December near Bakhmut. And then the most brutal account here is from a soldier named Artem, who the Daily Beast spoke with. He said that he believes he had up to 30 concussions since the war began and is only now on a 21-day treatment at a psychiatric ward in Kharkiv. Artem said that for months his injuries were treated on the front lines by military medics who told him to keep fighting. Recently, while on the front lines in the Donetsk region, he said that he had a psychotic break and was brought to the psychiatric ward in Kharkiv. So some people pronounce Kharkiv, or Kharkiv. I double checked, the Ukrainian pronunciation, and Kharkiv seems to be it. And then the Russian pronunciation might be different, but Kharkiv is what I saw most commonly. But anyway, so this is a Ukrainian soldier who is in a psych ward for having a psychotic break on the front lines, and this is what he said. Quote, "I've had post-traumatic stress disorder for a long time now. I am used to it," end quote. And then Artem added that right now his brigade does not have enough weapons to ward off Russian advances. He said that he hopes that the U.S. aid will help Ukraine and give soldiers like him and his brigade enough weapons to win the war, but that he does not think it will amount to much. Artem has to go back to the front line soon and said that he is trying to find some way to not go. He does not believe he can mentally handle the fighting any longer. He just wants the war to be over. As he spoke, he began to cry and said that the only thing keeping him motivated on the front lines is his fellow soldiers. When asked how he feels about having to return to combat, Artem said, "Look into my eyes as they filled with tears," and he added that the U.S. aid will not help, and he said that he thinks Russia is going to win and that he doesn't want to go back to the front. So a really just brutal account from a Ukrainian soldier who just, this is what the $61 billion is buying you, is just more death and destruction. And it's really interesting to see this many people interviewed who live near the war on the Ukrainian side saying enough negotiations. We need to end this. So anyway, the next story here, Yemen's Houthis target 2 ships in the Gulf of Aden. So Yemen's Houthis targeted commercial ships in the Gulf of Aden on Wednesday and Thursday as part of their campaign to protest the Israeli slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza. The attacks came after a relative lull in Houthi operations following months of frequent attacks. The Houthis, officially known as Ansar Allah, claimed that they hit the Maersk Yorktown, which is a U.S. flagged, owned, and operated container ship, and it also has an American crew. So, if there is an attack on an American ship with an American crew and Americans get hurt or die, that, of course, could lead to another big escalation. And U.S. Central Command said that a Houthi missile was intercepted that appeared to be targeting the Maersk Yorktown. So the Houthis claim that they hit the ship, and the U.S. said that they intercepted the missile. And then the following day, so this was on Thursday, the Houthis claimed another attack on the MSC Darwin, which is a Liberian-flagged container ship. The details, haven't seen confirmation from the other side on that. But also on Thursday, the Houthi leader Syed Abdul Malik al-Houthi said that Ansar Allah forces would expand attacks on Israeli shipping into the Indian Ocean. And this is a threat that he's made before last month. And so, again, there was kind of a short lull in Houthi attacks, it seemed like. But now 2 days in a row, and they're threatening more. I wonder if it's because we did see the U.S. say recently that they're thinking about diplomacy with the Houthis, because the bombing campaign didn't work, just completely failed to deter them. So I wonder if there was some kind of back channel negotiations going on. I know the Cradle had a report that the U.S. apparently offered them a lot, like recognition. That's the only place I saw that reported. But, there's a chance that I think there might have been some back channel stuff. But the Houthis have maintained that they'll only stop if there's a ceasefire in Gaza. All right, so the next one here, Hezbollah dismisses Israeli claim that half of its commanders were killed. So this article is from Jason Ditz. Hezbollah sources commented in the media on yesterday's claim from Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant that half of the commanders in Hezbollah have been killed and the other half are hiding, and the group maintains that the claim is untrue and baseless. So Gantz's comments got a lot of attention, made a lot of headlines. Hezbollah sources say that only a handful of commanders at a meaningful level have been killed, and that the number does not exceed the numbers of fingers on one hand. Estimates from the Israeli press put the number of brigade commanders killed at 6, although even that figure is uncertain, and even that is way lower than what Gallant was claiming. So attacks continued. Israeli attacks in eastern Lebanon continued. They hit a fuel truck in the area. No word on. The driver was wounded. No word on anybody being killed in the latest. But this situation continues to be very volatile. You know what? I actually skipped a story in the Ukraine section that I would like to go back to. Ukraine sidelines Abrams tanks after Russian drone attacks. So this is from Will Porter at the Libertarian Institute. The Ukrainian military has opted to withdraw its U.S.-supplied M1 Abrams main battle tanks from the front lines due to the threat posed by Russian drones, American officials told AP. Kiev has reportedly lost several of the tanks since their long-delayed deployment in February. The decision comes as Moscow increasingly relies on UAVs for round-the-clock surveillance and airstrikes, making the Abrams too difficult to operate without detection or coming under attack. The tanks have been removed from the fight for an unspecified period as Kiev and Washington work to reset tactics. So this is interesting. And this is an example of how, we've seen this. We've talked about this, how even Ukrainians have said this, that they get these weapons from the West, from the U.S., and sometimes they can be very useful and very, very effective at first, but pretty quickly Russia figures out a way to adjust and counteract them. And here with the Abrams tanks, they just deployed them in February, and they're already pulling them back. They didn't last very long. And really, the Abrams tanks, the reason why the U.S. sent them was to get the Germans to send the Leopard tanks. But anyway, it's just an example of how those Ukrainians are right, that the aid is not going to do anything, just prolong the war. All right, so the next one here, NATO says that China must cut trade with Russia. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg on Thursday went after China for its trade relationship with Russia, saying Beijing must reduce its trade with Moscow to have good relations with the West. So, the nerve of Stoltenberg, it's just unbelievable the way that they try to dictate things to other countries, especially a big country like China. So Western officials often accuse China of supporting Russia's military, but there's no evidence of Beijing shipping weapons. Instead, they point to China's export of semiconductors and raw materials. Stoltenberg said, quote, Russia's friends in Asia are vital for its war effort. First and foremost, China. China is propping up Russia's war economy, sharing high-end technology like semiconductors and other dual-use items with Russia. Last year, Russia imported 90% of its microelectronics from China, used to produce missiles, tanks, and aircraft, end quote. Stoltenberg also accused China of fueling the war, even though Beijing has consistently called for peace talks, while the U.S. and leading NATO countries have discouraged diplomacy and have dumped tens of billions of dollars worth of weapons into Ukraine. Stoltenberg said, quote, China says it wants good relations with the West. At the same time, Beijing continues to fuel the largest armed conflict in Europe since World War II. They cannot have it both ways, end quote. So, I mean, it's really unbelievable that he says that as he's overseen this military alliance that has completely fueled the war, again, by dumping all these weapons, discouraging diplomacy, and China's just trading with Russia, and increasing that trade with Russia. And it's the U.S. drove them together by sanctioning both countries. Just not a smart strategy. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. to withdraw special forces from Chad. So kind of some more conflicting, confusing information from Africa. So the U.S., the New York Times first reported on Thursday that the U.S. will withdraw 75 U.S. Special Forces personnel from Chad in the coming days. The Pentagon later said that the move was temporary as they're trying to sign a new deal to continue their military presence in Chad. So this is the special forces that they have there, Green Berets. Apparently there's a handful of troops based at the embassy and some military advisors that will stay. So the U.S. isn't completely leaving, but this is kind of their most significant force there that they're pulling out. And they're saying it's temporary, and this might, be just more of that wishful thinking from the U.S. So they're saying that after Chad has elections on May 6th, they're going to try to negotiate a new agreement to justify their military presence. And the withdrawal comes after the U.S. said that it agreed to a request from the government in neighboring Niger to pull troops out. Now, that's also very confusing now. The U.S. said that they agreed to withdraw, but then we saw a very high-level U.S. military official say, well, hang on a minute. We haven't made a final decision. We might try to negotiate something. But, again, Niger has not shown any sign that they're interested in that they want a continued U.S. presence. So that claim is just, I think, is just completely wrong. And if you remember that whistleblower, the big thing was that they were saying the U.S. officials were putting on a facade that there was still good relations between the U.S. and Niger. So hopefully this ends with the U.S. pulling out of Chad, pulling out of Niger, and just getting out of that region. Of course, the U.S. has this big drone base in Niger that it doesn't want to give up. So that's what this is all about. All right, so the last story here, ByteDance prefers to shut down TikTok instead of Divest. So this article is from Kyle at the Libertarian Institute. It says ByteDance says that it will not sell off its popular video sharing app TikTok after President Biden signed a law that will ban the platform from American users in 9 months if it is not sold away from Chinese ownership. Several sources inside ByteDance say that TikTok is not for sale. The company officials explain that while TikTok is only a small portion of ByteDance's business, the technology used by the platform is also utilized across ByteDance's other services. The company believes selling TikTok will hurt its other business. So they have 9 months to divest, or the U.S. will ban them. That's the law that's part of the bill that Biden signed into law. And they're going to fight it. They're going to take it to the courts, and I think they have a good chance of winning, of beating it. The question is, how long will it take? Will they be banned and then have to be reinstated? Because that could be a whole thing. So we've seen some support for TikTok from some people in Congress, even though most of them are in favor of the ban. Senator Rand Paul said, quote, "The censors who abound in Congress will likely vote to ban TikTok or force a change in ownership. It will likely soon be law." I think the Supreme Court will ultimately rule it unconstitutional because it would violate the First Amendment rights of over 100 million Americans who use TikTok to express themselves, end quote. And he wrote that in an op-ed for Reason, I think, before the legislation was passed. So at least someone in Congress is against it. But so that's it for the news for today. Reminder that it is our fundraiser, so you can go to antiwar.com to see the different ways that you can help us out. We're totally reliant on our readers. This is how we get by. This is how we are able to provide you with this coverage of U.S. foreign policy from our anti-war, non-interventionist perspective. To maintain this independent editorial line that we have, this is what we have to do. So antiwar.com/donate. You can see the different ways you can support us: credit card, PayPal, crypto, all things like that. So please help us out. Go check out our Viewpoints, one from Maha Halal, Torture, Abu Ghraib, and the Legacy of the U.S. War on Iraq. One from Will Porter, How Many Israelis Killed by Friendly Fire, about the Israeli response to the October 7th attacks. Branko March Teach, Why They Call Student Protesters Anti-Semites. One from Pedro Gonzalez, How Trump Saved Ukraine Aid. Some interesting stuff in there about behind-the-scenes things that were happening. Apparently, Lindsey Graham was involved. And the spotlight is from Ted Snyder, What $61 billion for Ukraine Won't Do. So please go check all of that out. And this is the last show for the week, so I hope everyone has a good weekend. Again, help us with our fundraiser. If you can't do that, all other stuff that you guys do, commenting, sharing, liking, subscribing, that all helps us out as well. But I'll be back in a few days. Thanks for listening.